The medieval African city, richer than European capitals, Timbuktu, Mansa Musa's empire. Introduction. The name that became a myth. For centuries, the name Timbuktu echoed through the imagination of the world as a place beyond reach. To many, it meant the end of the earth, a distant, mysterious land buried beneath endless sand. In medieval Europe, to say something was as far as Timbuktu meant it was unknowable, unreachable, and unreal. Yet, while Europe struggled through famine, disease, and political chaos, a very different reality was unfolding in West Africa. In the heart of the Sahel, at the crossroads of desert and river, rose a city of knowledge, wealth, and global influence, a city where books were more valuable than gold, a city whose ruler would become the wealthiest human being in recorded history. This is the story of Timbuktu, and this is the story of the empire that made it the richest city on earth. The world before Timbuktu. To understand how extraordinary Timbuktu truly was, we must first understand the world it existed in. In the medieval era, Europe was fragmented into feudal states. Most people lived short, difficult lives. Literacy was rare. Universities were just beginning to emerge, and books were copied by hand at enormous cost. Roads were unsafe. Trade was limited. Kings ruled small territories and constantly fought for survival. At the same time, the Islamic world stretched from Spain to Central Asia, connecting continents through trade, scholarship, and faith. And in the middle of this global network stood Africa, not isolated, not primitive, but deeply connected. At the center of this African world was the Mali Empire, the birth of an empire. The Mali Empire did not rise by accident. In the early 13th century, West Africa was home to many kingdoms and tribes. Among them were the Mandinka people, ruled by a legendary leader named Sundiata Keita. According to oral history preserved by griots, West Africa's master historians, Sundiata was born weak and unable to walk. Yet he grew into a warrior, a unifier, and a visionary leader. He defeated rival kings, united fractured lands, and laid the foundations for one of the greatest empires in history. Under Sundiata, Mali developed systems of law, governance, and trade. One of the earliest known constitutions in the world, the Kurukan Fuga Charter, was established, protecting human rights, property, and even the environment. By the time Sundiata's descendants ruled, Mali controlled something no other power on earth could claim: gold. The geography of wealth. Mali sat atop the richest gold fields in the known world, Bambouk, Bour, and Lobi. At a time when gold-backed currencies were becoming the standard across Europe and the Middle East, Mali supplied nearly half of the world's gold. But gold alone did not create Timbuktu's wealth. Salt was equally important. In the medieval world, salt preserved food, sustained armies, and saved lives. The Sahara Desert contained vast salt mines, while the southern forests held gold. Mali controlled the routes between them. Caravans of thousands of camels crossed the desert, carrying salt south and gold north. Every trade passed through Malian territory, and every trade was taxed. Mali became the gatekeeper of civilization. The rise of Mansa Musa. In this empire of unimaginable wealth, a man named Musa Keita ascended the throne. History would remember him as Mansa Musa. Unlike many kings, Musa was deeply educated, deeply religious, and deeply strategic. He understood that true power was not only wealth, but reputation, and so he made a decision that would change world history. He would travel to Mecca, the pilgrimage that shook the world. When Mansa Musa set out on his pilgrimage, it was not a quiet spiritual journey. It was the largest, most extravagant procession the world had ever seen. Tens of thousands of people marched with him, officials, soldiers, servants, and slaves dressed in silk. Camels carried enormous loads of gold dust. The caravan stretched beyond the horizon, moving like a golden river across the desert. When Musa reached Cairo, the world took notice. He gave gold freely, to the poor, to scholars, to merchants, to rulers. He spent without restraint. The result was economic chaos. Gold flooded the markets. Its value collapsed. entire regions experienced inflation that lasted years. For the first time, the world understood the scale of Africa's wealth. But Musa's true genius was not generosity, it was investment. Importing knowledge. During his journey, Mansa Musa recruited architects, scholars, poets, and scientists from across the Islamic world. He invited them to return with him to Mali. His destination was clear: Timbuktu, Timbuktu, from camp to capital. Timbuktu began as a simple settlement near the Niger River, a meeting point between desert caravans and river traders. But under Musa, it transformed into something unprecedented: a city of learning. At its heart stood the Sankore Mosque, which evolved into a vast university system. Not a single campus, but a network of schools, libraries, and private teachers. Students came from across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Some studied law, others astronomy, others medicine, mathematics, theology, philosophy, and poetry. Education was not restricted to elites. Scholarship defined status. In Timbuktu, a learned mind was the greatest wealth a person could possess. The manuscript city. The soul of Timbuktu lived in its books. Thousands upon thousands of manuscripts filled private libraries and public collections. Families passed books down through generations like treasures. Subjects included complex mathematics and geometry, advanced astronomy and star mapping, medical treatments and surgical techniques, legal systems and ethical philosophy, women's rights and social responsibilities. Books were copied, traded, debated, and preserved. The book trade became the city's most profitable industry. In a world where much of Europe could not read, Timbuktu was a city of scholars. Architecture of earth and genius Mansa Musa reshaped Timbuktu's skyline. With the help of foreign architects and local builders, he introduced a unique architectural style using mud, timber, and baked earth. These buildings were perfectly suited to the harsh climate. The Jingwareber Mosque stood as a masterpiece, massive, elegant, and enduring. Its walls cooled the interior naturally. Wooden beams protruded outward, allowing annual replastering by the entire community. Maintenance became ritual. Architecture became culture. Timbuktu was built not to dominate nature, but to live with it. Life in the Golden City travelers described Timbuktu as orderly, safe, and prosperous. Justice was strict. Theft was rare. Roads were secure. Merchants traveled freely. Scholars debated openly, music and poetry flourished, markets buzzed with languages from across continents. A traveler could cross the empire carrying gold without fear. This stability created a golden age unlike any other. The weight of empire. Yet even the greatest empires face challenges. After Mansa Musa's death, his successors struggled to maintain unity. Trade routes shifted. Internal conflicts weakened control. New powers emerged. The Songhai era. The Songhai Empire rose from the east, eventually absorbing Timbuktu. Under rulers like Askia Muhammad, the city experienced another intellectual peak. But the world was changing. Firearms appeared. European powers advanced. Trade dynamics shifted toward the Atlantic. The desert that once protected Timbuktu became a vulnerability. The fall of foreign invasion shattered the city's political power. Scholars fled. Libraries were looted. Timbuktu faded from global memory, but its people never forgot. The hidden treasure. For centuries, families hid manuscripts in trunks, caves, and walls. Knowledge was preserved in silence. When modern extremists threatened to destroy this heritage, ordinary citizens risked their lives to save it. Books were smuggled under cover of darkness. History was protected not by armies, but by librarians. The living legacy today, Timbuktu stands as a symbol of what Africa was and what it can be. It proves that wealth is not only measured in gold, that civilization is not defined by conquest, that knowledge can outlast empires. Timbuktu was never a myth. It was a mirror, reflecting a world that once chose wisdom over war. And its story is still being written. The scholars behind the silence. What made Timbuktu truly immortal was not its gold, nor its mosques, but its people. Scholars in Timbuktu were not isolated academics locked in ivory towers. They were judges, doctors, astronomers, diplomats, and teachers. Knowledge here was practical. It shaped daily life. Astronomers charted the movement of stars to determine prayer times and agricultural cycles. Physicians documented treatments using local plants centuries before similar ideas appeared elsewhere. Legal scholars debated contracts, inheritance laws, and international trade ethics with remarkable sophistication. Education was not memorization, it was discussion. Students challenged teachers. Ideas were tested, refined, and preserved. This was not borrowed knowledge. It was African knowledge, written by African hands. Women and knowledge. Contrary to many assumptions about the medieval world, women in Timbuktu held intellectual and economic influence. Women owned property. They ran businesses. Some were scholars in their own right, commissioning and preserving manuscripts. Education was respected regardless of gender. Marriage contracts detailed rights and responsibilities. Legal texts discussed women's consent, inheritance, and autonomy. Topics many parts of the world would not openly debate for centuries. Timbuktu's manuscripts reveal a society far more complex and progressive than history books once admitted. A city without walls. Unlike many medieval capitals, Timbuktu was not heavily fortified with massive stone walls. Unlike many medieval capitals, Timbuktu was not heavily fortified with massive stone walls. Its greatest defense was stability. The empire's justice system was feared and respected. Crime was punished swiftly. Corruption was rare. Leadership was accountable. Foreign traders trusted Timbuktu because agreements were honored. Knowledge thrived because debate was protected. Faith flourished because diversity was tolerated. This balance created something rare in history: long-term peace. The desert as a highway to outsiders. The Sahara was a deadly barrier. To Timbuktu, it was a road. Camel caravans moved like clockwork, guided by stars and memory. Experienced guides memorized dunes, winds, and wells. Entire economies depended on this knowledge. These routes connected West Africa to North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. Ideas traveled with goods. Mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and law crossed the desert alongside salt and gold. Timbuktu was not isolated. It was central. Europe looks south. As Europe slowly emerged from its dark age, maps began to change. Cartographers drew Mansa Musa holding a gold nugget, seated on a throne. His image appeared on world maps as a symbol of unimaginable wealth. Explorers began searching for Timbuktu, not to learn from it, but to exploit it. The shift was subtle at first, then it became violent. Colonial erasure centuries later, colonial narratives deliberately minimized Africa's intellectual past. European historians dismissed Timbuktu as exaggeration or myth. Why? Because acknowledging Timbuktu meant admitting that Africa had universities before colonization, written history before Europeans arrived, and global influence long before modern empires. The manuscripts contradicted everything colonial ideology depended on, so they were ignored. The quiet guardians. But Timbuktu's people never waited for recognition. Families hid books for generations. Fathers taught sons, mothers taught daughters. Knowledge survived quietly, patiently. When danger returned in the modern era, it was not governments that saved Timbuktu's legacy. It was ordinary people, shopkeepers, boatmen, librarians, farmers. They understood something deeply. Once knowledge is destroyed, it cannot be rebuilt. The modern awakening. Today, scholars around the world are rediscovering Timbuktu. Manuscripts once buried beneath sand are being studied. They challenge timelines. They rewrite assumptions. They force history to be honest. Africa was never silent. It was ignored. Why Timbuktu still matters? Timbuktu matters because it changes how we see the past. It proves civilization is not owned by one continent. Knowledge does not belong to one culture. Progress has many origins. It reminds us that wealth without wisdom fades, but wisdom without gold can last forever. Final reflection. Timbuktu was richer than European capitals, not only because of gold, but because it invested in the human mind. Its mosques were schools, its markets were classrooms, its libraries were its true treasury. Empires rose and fell, gold was spent, buildings eroded, but ideas survived. And as long as those ideas are remembered, Timbuktu is not lost. It is waiting. The myth that refused to die. Even after its decline, Timbuktu refused to disappear. Travelers continued to speak of it in whispers. Merchants spoke of lost libraries. Scholars spoke of hidden knowledge. Explorers searched for it, often expecting ruins, only to find a living city that no longer needed to impress the world. To outsiders, Timbuktu seemed quiet, but quiet does not mean empty. It meant guarded. Knowledge as resistance. For the people of Timbuktu, knowledge became an act of resistance. When political power faded, books remained. When armies arrived, manuscripts were hidden. When outsiders rewrote African history, families quietly preserved the truth. This was not accidental. Parents taught children to respect books as sacred objects. Manuscripts were wrapped, sealed, and protected as if they were living beings. Some were buried beneath floors, others were sewn into walls, some were carried across generations without ever being read, saved not for use, but for survival. The people understood something crucial: empires can be rebuilt, knowledge, once destroyed, cannot. The silence of the libraries. Walking through Timbuktu today, you may not immediately see its former glory. There are no marble palaces, no towering stone monuments, no gold-plated gates. Instead, there is earth, dust, wind. But behind simple doors lie rooms where centuries of human thought still rest, libraries that do not announce themselves, knowledge that does not demand attention. This silence is intentional. It protected Timbuktu when noise would have destroyed it. The false idea of progress. Modern history often tells a simple story, that progress moved in a straight line, from Greece to Rome, from Europe to the modern world. Timbuktu shatters that illusion. Progress is not linear. It moves in circles. It rises in one place while sleeping in another. It disappears, then returns. While Europe burned books, Timbuktu copied them. While others conquered land, Timbuktu cultivated minds. While empires fought, Timbuktu taught. This does not make Timbuktu superior. It makes it human. The question Timbuktu asks us. Timbuktu forces an uncomfortable question. What do we value as civilization? Is it buildings, weapons, borders, or is it the ability to think, debate, record, and remember? Timbuktu chose memory. Gold versus wisdom. Mansa Musa's gold changed economies, but it eventually vanished, melted, spent, redistributed. His libraries did something else. They waited. They waited for a world ready to listen again. And now, centuries later, that moment has arrived. The return of the voice. As manuscripts are studied, something remarkable happens. African history begins to speak in its own voice. Not through conquest reports, not through colonial archives, but through poetry, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy written by Africans, for Africans, centuries ago. Timbuktu is no longer something to be discovered. It is something to be acknowledged. A city that defied forgetting. Most cities rise and fall. Timbuktu did something different. It stepped aside. It allowed the world to forget it, so it could survive, and now it returns not as a city of gold, but as a city of truth. Final words. Timbuktu was richer than European capitals because it understood something rare, that wealth should serve knowledge, that power should protect learning, that silence can be stronger than noise. It was not the end of the world. It was the center of it, and perhaps if we listen closely enough, it still is.